Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Islamic Vibes podcast. I'm your host Majid, and today I'm joined by my brother, co-host, brother Abdul Ahad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brother, and welcome.
Wa Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Always an honor and pleasure.
Yes, pleasure. Honor is mine. Pleasure is mine, bro. How are you doing? You good?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well. Alhamdulillah. How about yourself?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, bro. Can't complain. Can't complain.
That's it.
Yeah, all praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But listen, let's get straight into it because we've got loads to chat about, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah. So today's topic, as people would have guessed, is on the events that's happening in Palestine at the moment. As we know, there was a preemptive attack, if you want to call it that, by the Palestinian fighters, led by and coordinated by Hamas, from what it seems, and they were able to, get past the defenses of the usurping entity, the state of Israel. And many people, unless you're like living in a cave or something, everyone knows the rest of the story. Many people were taken hostage. There were many firefights. Many people were killed on the Israeli side. And as we know, since I would say yesterday, Gaza is now being totally flattened. I don't think there's any other way of saying this. And actually, this is being endorsed by the so-called international community. So, bro, let's get straight into this. Really, first of all,
Yeah.
your thoughts on what happened.
Yes, subhanAllah. Firstly, the first thing is that, like, alhamdulillah, I'm not really afraid of any sort of consequences whatsoever. After all these years of systematic oppression, after these years of this genocide that's been going on, it's really amazing to see these efforts, and not only just these efforts, but these efforts done upon the principles of the Quran and the Sunnah, from not just like blatant attacks on civilians. And I know there is, of course, a rhetoric, and we're going to definitely discuss that as well, when there is that sort of these claims of that. But the Mujahideen are actually protecting the civilians and captivating their IDF reservists. And when these sort of things happen, like, the first thing I get is this happiness, because how many more Palestinian children, how many more Palestinian political prisoners are being held captive for years and being harmed and tortured in the most vile, vicious ways by the Israeli forces. So the issue is that, alhamdulillah, like, it's a sort of a mix of different thoughts right now when it comes to why I'm really like happy in regards to this. But alhamdulillah, yeah.
No, of course. And to be honest with you, bro, I think in regards to the emotions, I think I would have to say most Muslims, and you can see this from the video footage and the crowds around the Muslim world, that this is something which people are seeing. I wouldn't say victory, however, it's something which has delivered some joy to the Muslims after many decades of what's going on. But at the same time, just to throw it in the mix, you do have some people. I mean, I was actually in dialogue with some as well, but you do have Muslims who come in from a different angle, from the angle of, well, look, this is not a good thing, because the consequences are going to be dire. They've brought this onto themselves. And in reality, this kind of attitude, I would say at most, it kind of disappoints me, because at a time when, when Muslims are kind of showing solidarity with what's happening there, you have this kind of negative thought. And I think, to be honest with you, it really belittles the effort of the people there, because do you not think that they know what's coming?
Yep.
This is not the first time, right? Do you not know that they know, yet they are going to do this because this is resistance? Okay, so at the end of the day, you have people who have been living in these conditions their land has been taken away. They've been made refugees in their own land. And, if that wasn't as bad as it gets, daily humiliation, especially when you're talking about in Gaza, where, as everyone calls it, an open air prison, basically, it's 2 million, just above 2 million people there. Half of them are children. So at the end of the day, what do Muslims want? Do Muslims want just, people to become subjugated and just to give up? I don't understand what reaction Muslims are expecting. So that's why,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you came across, any of these type of thoughts, this kind of attitude in your discussion with Muslims. But this was something that, a lot of people, well, I wouldn't say a lot of people, some people, in my opinion, they kind of outed them, because
Yeah.
majority of Muslims saw this as something positive, whilst a few were seeing it as negative.
Yeah, yes, Manolo. I was actually speaking with I'm not going to name him, but one of the sort of these members of the Conservative Party of Canada, one of the sort of I guess you could sort of say Muslim community organizers. So basically, if you're familiar maybe with Pierre Poliev and all these, him like sort of tackling on True or whatnot. The issue is that he has this hardcore support for Israel, and I was discussing these issues with him. The thing is that of course he is for Palestine, but the amount of inferior um, complexity that occurs is not surprising at all. And not only just inferior complex, but sometimes there's a degree of Stockholm syndrome where people they start thinking a more Machiavellian, but like not even in terms of Machiavellian, sort of they just see the short term sort of thing that hey, you know what? If anything happens to the status quo, what happens is that oh because there is a challenge by this minor force, this Palestinian resistance against this large Zionist hegemony that uses ruthless war tactics such as using white phosphorus gases, um, you know and indiscriminate targeting of civilian infrastructure. you know the thing is that they sort of see that because they sort of see that because we're in an inferior complex and the Palestinians are inferior complex, there will be no good coming from it. But then they forget about how Rasul Sallam in Mecca, he was in a minority complex as well, but that didn't stop him, so, from statehood, from so many different efforts. So the thing is that of course people are going to talk like this. Of course people are going to be worried about for example themselves, even around here, because of course Hamas is a designated terrorist organization, and in Canada and the EU, they actually, I think they, for some period of time, they took it off the terrorist list and then they put it back on, but this is the irony, when it comes to this, there's always these aspects of that contribute to that inferior complex. Canada put the PKK in northern Syria as a terrorist organization until the Syrian war started, and of course the U.S. was supporting the PKK with its efforts in northern Syria. But the thing is that like we really have to just really dwell more into these issues and these various factors and variables to understand that we could like holistically derive from the Sirah, from Rasul's biography, how he dealt while he was a minority, while he dealt while dealing with starvation and dealing with torture and all these different things. It's not something new to us, this sort of oppression and persecution.
Yeah, no, exactly, bro. And I think that's what we need to look back at. I mean, if you look at our Islamic history, whether it's the time of the Sirah, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or after, we saw that these people were on a mission. They were on the front foot, yeah, ultimately, because the goal was to take mankind out of darkness. So they were on the front foot. And even when you look at situations like the Battle of Handak, for example, if somebody wants to say, well, okay, let's not use the word being on the offensive, and because sometimes people, because of, like you're saying, this I would say colonized mentality, they only want to really include any violence in a defensive context, right? But if you look at the Battle of Khandaq, you know, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, and the companions, they they took all the practical steps that they needed to, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them victory, right? You know, had they, you know, had this mentality that actually there's 10,000, you know, coalition of the willing that are marching upon Medina, there's no point, because you know what's going to happen to the women, what's going to happen to the children. We might as well just give up. But they didn't, and these are those lessons. I mean, in all honesty, one of the lessons that I think is really important with this specific incident is the fact that, like you mentioned, in regards to the sort of colonized mind and people being subjugated within their mindset, right? We see that there's this myth of the invincibility of Israel as an example, right? That's, you know, that was kind of implanted in the minds of the Muslims through the sort of, like, I would say, false flag attacks of the, you know, 1967, 1973, I think it was, those wars, where basically it was like, look, you know, these guys defeated all the Arabs in 6 days, right? You know, they are totally, you know, they are impossible to beat. However, what we saw is, you know, a small force be able to do what it did with, you know, homemade devices, with, you know, normal weapons and such. And then it kind of like begs the question, and I think a lot of Muslims are asking this now, that if these people could do this, these people who are being under siege for 16 years, where they're smuggling things in and out, right? What if now you had a proper armed force, you had a proper military, where you look in the Muslim lands, you know, the weapons of the Muslim armies are rusting ultimately, right? Whilst, you know, the lions of Philistine are doing what they're doing. This should be a lesson that actually it doesn't even take militaries. Maybe it would take a couple of battalions, in all honesty, and this problem would be resolved. You know, it's taken what, since 1948, but this problem could be resolved in a couple of days. So I think that's something which I know in my interaction with a lot of Muslims, they are thinking about that now. They are thinking, actually, wait a minute, what are these militaries around? What are they doing? In fact, to them, the way they're seeing is actually these governments that are there that are holding these people back. They are actually the real IDF. They are the IDF, because in reality, if they weren't holding back their resources, if they weren't holding back their people, then this matter would be, you know, resolved a long time ago. So this has been a positive.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, especially coming to that aspect of you know, that sort of the minor group overcoming the larger group. There's repetitive trends of this in history, and as you said, you know, even if you look at a case study recent of Idlib, for example, when they're, I think, back in 2013 or 14 or 15, I forgot, multiple rebel groups made operations rooms called the Jaish al-Fateh, Army of Conquest. Our brother Tokyo in Live Update Syria, I remember he was updating a lot when back in those times. It was just these small groups that managed to overcome Assad and Idlib, you know. So the issue is that it's not really about having a whole professional military. It's just about having, you know, this is urban warfare, right? Urban warfare is very irregular. You're using various tactics in between infrastructures. You know, there's different sort of variables that come into this. This isn't like a full front sort of siege or trench warfare at all. So the thing is you're absolutely right. Just from like, I'm not even talking just in terms of a deen wise, but just from a sort of a tactics perspective, you do definitely make a good point that, you know what, it literally took a bunch of, like, subhanAllah, a bunch of brothers to, like, literally come in what's it called, they're like
Gliders, man, they glided in.
they're paragliders, like, subhanAllah. Look, you know, though, I was with this one younger brother who's Palestinian as well, at Halakha, and he was telling me it looks like Fortnite, you know, subhanAllah, like when they're when they're coming in, you know. And these are things that are just very, you know, simple to do, but of course when there is coordination, when there is tawakkul, when there is trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when there's these principles of deen that are being upheld, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that little paraglider more stronger than an F-16.
Yeah, 100% agree with you, bro. The
Yeah,
thing is, though, is from what I see, is maybe there was a hope that the fighters thought that if they could breach the perimeter, if they could enter, because they took quite a lot of land initially, right?
yeah, they
But the
did.
reality is that I don't think they had any intentions anyway. But the point is they did what was in their capacity. And this is what I mean. They did what was in their capacity. Maybe it was an action which was to, because if you think about a lot of the statements by some of the leaders of the resistance,
Yeah,
they were talking about how, look, Philistine, Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa, these don't belong to the Palestinians. This is an issue of the Ummah. And they were regularly calling out, maybe in the hope that actually these events may inspire the people in the surrounding countries to actually do something about it.
mhm,
Because to be fair, bro, I mean, we know about the issue to do with numbers, and at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown time and time again, if there's a small number who are steadfast, they will overcome a larger number. But if you're thinking about actually liberating the entirety of Philistine, then a small militia is not capable of doing that. Okay, because
yeah,
here you're talking about not just a raid, you're talking about taking over and then staying there, right? You
mhm,
need forces, you just need the numbers. So in that context, I think it was, maybe a moment, a demonstration of what can be done. But
yeah,
ultimately, what it boils down to is the fact that you know the brothers who create through their courageous actions, they knew that what was going to come. So for example, what we're hearing about now, with the bombardment and possible land invasion, yeah, they
yeah,
understand this, and I'm sure, inshallah ta'ala, that they're prepared as well. But ultimately, I think personally it was a message to the wider ummah that the time has come. Yeah, if you look
mhm,
at some of the rhetoric, if you look at the speech made by the head of some of the fighting factions, it was like, look, this is the time now to liberate Philistine. It wasn't like this is just a raid. It was actually they were talking about the moment has come. However, they can't do it by themselves, and ultimately, um, you know, their bravery, how courageous they are. Their account is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may Allah reward them with the highest
I mean,
position in Jannah for those.
I
However, I think it was more of a, something which to inspire the rest of the ummah that, listen, these people are not invincible, right? You have tawakkul, you have iman, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
mean,
tells us that if the whole world wants to harm you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want you to be harmed, they can't harm you, right? Ultimately. And I think a lot of us, maybe we think about, you know, we think a million times before we want to do something. But at times you can't factor all these, you know, I would say some of these things are out of your control. You can't really factor what's going to happen if I do this. Then is this going to happen? Is that going to
yeah,
happen? This sort of like unseen fatalism. This
yeah,
paralyzes people, right? It paralyzes nations. You do the action. It's the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you know the good that comes out from it is going to be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's all you
yes,
can
wallah.
do.
Yeah. You mentioned sort of the larger like implication of this offensive that's being occurred, and of course you did mention the point that of course it would take of course the ummah, the larger ummah, ummah's involvement military in a military effort, um, you know to actually liberate all of Palestine. But the thing is that one thing that I am thinking about is the sort of the tactics that they're using. Right now, what they're doing is they're captivating many Israeli citizens. And one thing I do want to mention is how many Israeli citizens are IDF reservists. You know, firstly, there's been multiple reports. Even recently, there was a sort of an interview after she was freed. This elder Israeli woman who was like held captive, but then afterwards let go because they were, of course, the Mujahideen were instructed to follow the command of Rasul Sallam, which is not to harm the women, not to harm the children. But there were so-called cases, for example, of, I think now the rhetoric in Canada, at least, or even the US and the West in general, is like, oh, Hamas is, for example, taking women and, na'udhu billah, like raping them and then violating them. And, there's all these different cases. The issue is that I'll give you one case that I actually studied very in depth. There was that famous video of this, I think this influencer named Noah Aragami, and then her boyfriend. Basically, they were taken, like she was taken on a motorcycle, and then he was taken like on the like just on foot. And the thing is that they were all like saying these different things, how this poor couple. But the issue is that they fought in a combat unit under the IDF. They are capable of violence, just because they look like that sort of like I don't know, like sort of a couple who are unarmed and hurtful. The issue is that they are able of violence. They fought in a combat unit in Israel, and the issue is that for Israel, and the issue is that I think that one thing that's really effective is how Hamas is captivating all these people who are capable of violence in order to firstly um, render Israel to not take actions of using, take actions of using their full force on Palestine, because of course they could risk harming their own. So I think that's very effective. Salahuddin, rahimahullah, he when basically the Crusaders, there was a point where the Crusaders were attacking the Muslimin when they had a sort of an agreement of like peace to some degree. And basically, Salahuddin, for example, there was there was these Christians, these pilgrims coming to Egypt, and he basically took them captives in order to stop the further Crusader sort of offensive by Reynald at the time. Reynald didn't stop it, so basically Salahuddin sold them to slavery. This was the norm. And the thing is that this is the reality that those IDF reservists citizens who literally are capable of violence are being captivated, and those who are vulnerable are being freed and let go of. There's multiple cases that have been recently shown in by documenting oppression against Muslims. For example, they were showing some of the footage because some channels are in Arab, and even some of the Hebrew channels are showing this as well. So, I think it is effective that they're doing this because, at the end of the day, as you said, it might not necessarily be a huge full offensive to liberate Al-Aqsa, and inshallah, Allahu alam, But the thing is that at least they will still have that upper hand of, hey, you know what, we have thousands of your soldiers. Now give us some of our Palestinian prisoners, and Allahu alam, maybe we might get back, our brothers, our sisters, their children, our women folk from those filthy prisons.
Yeah, no. To be honest with you, I think this is a move which they calculated. And I was reading this statement earlier as well by I'm not sure exactly who it was, but he was involved in the within the sort of fighters, and he was saying that their aim was to kind of go in and mainly to take hostages in order to then do a prisoner swap for all the thousands languishing in the prisons. And he said, when we got there, it was just kind of crazy how easy it was. And I think he used the term like paper tiger. He goes, the soldiers were like paper tigers, right? So I think the fact that they've done this, it gives them a slight leverage, 100%, because I think ultimately when these sort of attacks happen, unless you're planning on actually liberating the entire land, right? You're doing it for political gains. I mean, in the sense like there's going to be political outcomes which you then gauge after the event, okay? And one of them will be that look at all these people in prison, right? We want to do a swap. I think last time the Israelis released 1,000 prisoners for one person. Yeah, for one Israeli, they released 1,000. So this could have been their view as well. But also, if you look at one of the justifications of their attack was to do with the fact that you are attempting to change the landscape of Al-Quds, the settler attacks, the attacks in West Bank on the normal people, the settlements. So it was a kind of a warning shot in that direction. Now, I think something that's really interesting, and it'd be good to kind of get your thought on this as well, that I'm not going down the route of that many Muslims are asking questions, and there's nothing wrong in asking questions like, how did this happen? Like, how is it possible? Right? It's the best intelligence in the world, the most secure perimeters, the high technology. How is this possible that this happened? I'm not really going to go down that route because, from my point of view, the will is there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make anything happen, right? That for me, that's not an issue. However, if you look at the situation and you look at it from a political point of view, and I'm not linking this to what happened, okay? What we see is that this event does benefit the United States. And you might be confused, like how is that possible? I'll explain. So what we see is that with the US, they've had issues with the current government. They've had issues with Netanyahu, and they've had issues with these kind of like extreme far right guys like Ben Gvir and that Stromrich, I think his name is, right?
Yeah, that's his name.
That's his name, right? So
yeah.
See, from their point of view, they are still pursuing their policy of the two-state solution, even though probably Trump kind of like slightly diverted from that, probably want to set his own legacy. Yeah, but ultimately the actual American policy is a two-state solution, because what they want is they want peace in the region. But you might think, wow, but not for the sake of Muslims. What they want is they want the conflict to end, and they want to integrate Israel into the region. And we're seeing that this is happening with all this normalization and so on, right? And one of the big obstacles to this is this government. Okay, so what you can see is that even with these massive demonstrations that are happening, that have stopped now, but were happening for a while now, millions of people coming out against the sort of like the laws that were being proposed, the change in the law. And there's many reports that actually, a lot of this, and I think the Israelis themselves said, the people in government said, we know that Americans have a hand in this, right? So what we see is that they're trying to apply pressure, and there's been resistance from this government. And actually what this government has been doing at the same time has been accelerating the Judaisation, is the term that they use, of the holy precincts, right? Of Al-Aqsa and stuff like this. From their point of view, what they want to do is they want to change the landscape so much that even in the future, when you do have a deal, right, you can only give so much. They want to actually change the reality on the ground. And America has a problem with this, okay? But what we're seeing with this attack, what it does do, it puts a lot of pressure, huge pressure on the government, okay? It puts huge pressure on Netanyahu. Some people may think, actually, you know what, he's got a lot of court cases against him. Maybe this was a false flag and he set it up to get people distracted. But ultimately, what this shows is this was a huge security blunder on the part of the government. And another angle that people are coming out with, and not just normal people, there's the newspaper Haaretz. It's probably the biggest newspaper in the occupied lands, right? They've been blatantly saying, look, the person responsible is Netanyahu, it's his government, the things that they've been doing in and around Masjid Al-Aqsa, the fact that they're going in and desecrating it on a daily basis, this provocation has led to this. So there's a lot of pressure there. Okay. Now, also with the issue to do with the Saudis, they've kind of like moved a little bit backwards in regards to the normalization, because under these conditions, how can they really do this? But if you put all this landscape in place, you see that the only real beneficiary from, other than the Muslims, is the US, if what they can do is basically get into a position where they say to Netanyahu, either you move now forward with what we want you to do, or basically you will be removed. And I think that's the kind of situation that we're seeing at the moment. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. like the I can understand that. I can understand that perspective. The issue of, for example, that game of realpolitik and the sort of moving of the pawns by the American hegemony. I definitely do understand that. I think though, when it comes to the internal division within Israel, one thing is that it would, like, I feel like in terms of Netanyahu, it would benefit to have a sort of I guess someone who is more subservient to the to the American sort of foreign policy, to sort of be like that sort of I guess one country that acts upon the U.S. Because I think that one thing that the U.S. lost recently is sort of having that, I guess, kind of overreaching hand. Although of course, yes, the U.S. does still influence Saudi. The issue is that there's a sort of growing multipolarity of powers, be it from Saudi, be it of Iran, be it of various other countries. And the thing is that the U.S. would really want what Russia have in the Middle East. Russia has Assad, Russia has Iran, to be its sort of pawns at times. So the U.S., although fine, does get some degree of support from that sort of Saudi, and there is a history of that. Saudi did sort of change a bit with its orientation. I'm not saying that it's not, of course, Saudi Arabia is the next Mujaddid. Of course, I'm not saying this at all. But the issue is that I think the U.S. really just wants a state that's very subservient to them, where they could establish even more military bases. They could establish more diplomatic and political control, and whoever is in power in Israel, they really just want them to be their puppet in the Middle East. So that's how I would I would see it, and I do sort of like agree with you in terms of Netanyahu. That, for example, there were a few things that I think he had disagreements with the U.S. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. The thing is I think the way it's been described in the past is something on the lines of, Israel is like a battleship or something, like an extension of American power. Now we know from day one it's like a colonial outpost. We know this, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is the nature of the Yahud, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran what they like. But ultimately, what we can see is that there has been resistance on certain things currently, and I think that's actually, that's also to do with the sort of Islamophobic, if I can use that term, mood in the world anyway. Because if you look in places like what's happening in India, right? So you've got these national movements. So if you think about when Netanyahu formed that government with those far right extremists, if you want to call them that, the religious element, because he's secular himself, right? But that religious element, this wasn't so much out of choice. It was also out of necessity. If he wanted to form a government, he had to form it with them. Now, by doing that, he's given them some concessions. For example, he's given the security to Ben Gvir. He's given a high position to the Stromrich. These are people who are known as being, politicians that you can't really deal with, you can't work with, but they've done this. So they're in a catch-22 situation, because at the same time, they're being told, listen, what you need to do is you need to have a lasting peace. You have to have a two-state solution. You have to come to the table. But there are people now very high up in government who are actually totally against that. So when these guys are desecrating, when Ben Gvir goes and visits Masjid Al-Aqsa, or shall I say desecrates Masjid Al-Aqsa, he knows what he's doing. Yeah, maybe in their mind there's this view of, you get people so angry, so they react, and then you come down on them hard, right? Because when you're doing certain actions, you're actually expecting a reaction. So what we're seeing is that whether it's to do with the Judaization of Al-Aqsa, of Al-Quds. Ultimately, the Israelis know their lifeline is linked to the US. The day the US stops supporting them, it's game over, right? They know this, right? However, they know that at one point, we're going to have to make some sort of a deal, okay? But what they are doing and what they've always done is when it comes down to a time when they're being told you need to speak to the Palestinians or there's going to be some deals or for example, this issue with Saudi, right? Okay, Saudi can't just normalize with you. It has to show some face to the Muslim world. It's going to have to show that you're giving real concessions to Palestine, right? So what do? Whenever these things happen, they always stall it by doing something on the ground, right? Which, for example, making new settlements, trying to change the situation on the ground that, before people might have said 1967 borders, right? We want 1967 borders. They change the landscape so much that when the next deal comes about, forget 1967, people are discussing, actually, are you going to give us part of West Bank, right? So they're constantly doing this, and this is their nature, bro. They're constantly doing this, and the US has had a lot of issues with Netanyahu and his style, and certainly these far-right religious extremists that they have there. Now, what can happen is an event like this can bring them in line by saying, look, it's the actions that you've done. Okay, they'll say, look, we don't agree with what Hamas has done, but you have to understand that there's provocation there, right? So because one of the main things that the Israelis want and why they vote people in, why they vote people like Netanyahu is the promise of security, okay? That I can secure you. That Yair Lapid guy, he looked a bit, soft. No. I can secure you. They want security, right? Now, when their security is at risk, you saw thousands of them running out of running to safety. Yeah. Security is at risk, bro. They will hold people to account. So now, if you can blame this on the current government, then who knows? Either the government comes into line and does what is being told by the US, or basically through this, they remove them. But this was just a thought. I don't want to spend too much time on this. It was just a thought.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring into the whole discussion, because I know we're speaking about the attacks and what happened and, in regards to what's happening in Gaza now. But I think it's important also to give some sort of political angle, because unfortunately, these events are always manipulated. And I want to mention one last thing, just to give an indication. So, for example, there's a joint statement made today. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly read a bit of it. So it says, today we, President Macron of France, Chancellor Scholz of Germany, Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, Prime Minister Sunak of the United Kingdom, and President Biden of the United States, express our steadfast and united support to the State of Israel and our unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and its appalling acts of terrorism. Now, that's normal. That's standard, right? The next thing they said was interesting. We make clear that the terrorist actions of Hamas have no justification, no legitimacy, and must be universally condemned. Must be universally condemned. So already is setting a precedent that basically you speak about liberating Al-Quds, and you speak about any sort of like violent method. This is something which is not going to be accepted, right? But the last thing I want to mention is all of us recognize the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people and support equal measure of justice and freedom for Israelis and Palestinians alike. But make no mistake, Hamas does not represent these aspirations. It offers nothing for the Palestinian people other than more terror and bloodshed. Okay, so what we're seeing here is, again, they're bringing it back to the table that for peace to be in this land, there has to be a solution, which is their solution, the two-state solution. Okay, but anyway, listen, I think we spent quite a bit on that. I want to ask you then, because we haven't got too much left. We know what's happening in Gaza now. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, and what do you think is going to happen next?
Yeah. So of course, I did mention my sort of my thoughts of solidarity, of course. When it comes to, for example, just like, I won't dwell too much into it, but some issues that you mentioned. One thing that's you mentioned this whole idea of, for example, two-state solution. The issue is that, as you said, there was that turmoil that built up to this the desecration of Masjid al-Aqsa. There was the Israeli settler violence. Even like recently there was cases of a Palestinian boy being torched. Alhamdulillah he survived, but he got torched. There was currently, there was all these various sort of provocations against our religious sacred sites, and not only that, of course, the continuation of daily humiliation, the continuation of cutting off resources. For example, like before now, there's a whole full cutoff. There was cutoff of electricity, there was a cutoff of water, very basic necessities. You know, um, you know, as there's this sort of thing. It's of course not surprising whatsoever. But one thing is that what will come about this sort of offensive. Will it be a fruitful one? Will we see like a whole like regime change? Allah Alam, I don't think that there will be a regime change, but I think that there will be, to some degree, um, maybe not by states, but perhaps by private organizations, even private donors, um, more support when it comes to Palestinian resistance, when it comes to their efforts in stopping them from losing their lands, from losing their homes, from the sort of Israeli settlement projects upon the Palestinian ancestral lands. So definitely, we will perhaps see an increase in that, and whether the status quo will remain or not. It does seem that it will remain, but nevertheless, I think you mentioned it as a small leverage. I think it's really actually a huge, major leverage when they did take many. I'm going to call them IDF reservists captive. And perhaps it's not just about prisoner exchange. Perhaps it's literally about look, like if you bombard us, we have your captives.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
bro. Exactly. And the thing is that in regards to, I saw a very interesting video where I think this sometimes does put things into context. It was a Palestinian brother in Gaza,
yeah.
and it's a recent one, so I think there's rubble in the background and stuff. And basically, it was a message to the Ummah, and basically he was saying, look, we don't need your money, right? We actually need real action. Yeah, we need the Ummah to come to our aid. Because look, the reality is Gaza gets flattened. Muslims, because they are very generous. We love our Ummah. We send money, we rebuild the buildings, and then a few years' time, they get flattened again. It's a cycle where we might not get fed up with it because we live in our comfortable lives. But the people there must surely, they must be thinking, what's going on? And this actually is something really shows the caliber of these people, bro. Really shows the caliber of these people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts people in their own places, yeah? Puts people in their places. And I think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the right people in Palestine because, if it was people like me, probably would have given it up a long time ago. Yeah?
Wow.
Right? It's the people there who are living in a situation where they are under oppression, their land's being taken, they're being persecuted, they're seeing all these governments around who previously backed them, who are now running to normalize with this usurping entity, yeah? They're seeing all of this, but rather than actually falling into despair, they think, you know what? Let's give them a nosebleed, right? These people, subhanAllah, and that's why as an ummah, we should feel indebted to the people of Palestine, whether it's Gaza, whether it's in Al-Aqsa, Al-Quds, that they are on the front line. They are not there protecting that land. They are not there holding their keys and their deeds just for themselves. Because when people say, well, you know what, they should not have done this attack because now it's going to become really difficult for them. But who says they're after ease? Because if they were after ease, then for many, many decades, the Yahud have been offering them compensation. Take this and leave. But they've stood up against this oppressive regime, which is backed by the superpower of the world, right? And whilst their own people have turned a blind eye. This is the reality. But subhanAllah, these people, they are so courageous, bro. And that's why, you know, when they are asking for real help, it's showing that they will continue doing what they're doing. They will continue. It doesn't matter if anybody else gets involved, but they are saying, Ya Ummah, where are you? Where are you? We can hold out for so long, right? We're doing our bit, but we need you. And I think this is a message which, you know, a resounding message that I felt this time around, where these courageous actions were followed up by calls to the Ummah, right? Calls to the Ummah, oh Ummah, where are you? And I think this is important. And that's why it's really disappointing when, you know, when you hear Muslims say, you know, things about, oh, well, you know, it's going to make it difficult. And another thing I want to quickly mention as well, bro, is I'm sure there are Muslims out there who love Palestine. They're like, yeah, we're pro-Palestine, right? But, you know, in their heart, there's this niggly feeling, this feeling of, whoa, you know what? This time it was Hamas and the resistance that started it. Like, you know, you know, when I'm speaking to Bob or John, how am I supposed to explain that? Like, you know, normally we show like we're on the defensive, but actually this time they started it. But people like that need to look at the map of 1948 and look at it now. They've been on the offensive since 1948 and they haven't stopped, right? So it's really things like this that are a lesson to the Ummah, that read your history. Be proud of your history, your deen. Be proud of your brothers and sisters who are resisting this for our sake, right? Rather than trying to make excuses for them.
Yeah. You know, just to interject on that last point, especially, you know, people have this sort of complex of conflating peace with the particular status quo that is being offered, and you know that if there's a ceasefire, oh, there's peace. You know, that there's this sort of false consciousness when it comes to this sort of theme that I'm mentioning. And the thing is that when people see like, oh, they're now it's you know, the Palestinians in the offensive, the issue is that they are literally on the offensive for the defense to defend Al-Aqsa from being desecrated, defend their ancestral lands from becoming further settlements. You know, as back like not too long ago when Sheikh Jahrar was being attacked. You know, when basically there were sort of Israeli plans to make sort of, I guess, amusement sites on literally on the graves of Palestinians. You know, the thing is that this is really just on the defensive. You know, if you think about, if you sincerely think about it, it's a means of survival, because the issue is that as you see that diminishing line, you know, if we look at the map and from 1948, 1949 until 1967, how much it diminishes, and then afterwards from 1967 all the way to 2012. See, 1967, there were big portions of Palestine. But afterwards, when we look at the map on 2012, it's literally these small little skirmishes because of the settlement projects.
Bro,
because of
look at them now. Now they're dots.
They're little dots because of the settlement projects and whatnot. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, you know, like if they actually become like just fully destroyed completely. Like, you see those little green dots on Wikipedia, they just like completely are eradicated and nobody cares about it, because the thing is that the Zionist regime is quite successful in that sort of you know, portraying themselves as humanizing, you know, democratic and all these sort of liberal sort of I guess you know, you could say angels. You know, but the issue is that they have managed to diminish these lands, destroy them through their sort of occupation methods. And what has happened now is that this is just really an offensive about survival, and a Palestinian resistance effort against, a Palestinian resistance for the survival, so that it doesn't diminish even to no dots anymore. And that's the sad reality. And that our brothers in Palestine are dealing with. And it's really like, for me, it just makes me even more sad when people think that this sort of offensive is something that isn't just, when it clearly is just.
Of course, bro. Of course. I was watching this short video about his brother. You might have seen him. I'm sure he's Palestinian.
Yeah,
He wears glasses. He makes really good videos, and he was talking about how many Muslims normally, when it seems like the Muslims in Palestine are on the defensive, like they're being attacked, everyone's like pro Palestine, pro Palestine. But now that they've gone on the offensive, it's like everyone's gone quiet. But do they not understand what resistance is? Right? What is resistance? It comes to a stage when people get fed up to the extent that they think, listen, I'm gonna die here anyway, by being subjugated, by being humiliated, by being starved, by being bombed, right? I might as well go and die with some honor. Because what choice do they have left? So when these Israelis are saying, um, all the civilians leave Gaza, say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Leave Gaza? It's frigging a prison. They can't leave. They can't leave by the sea. But then they're saying, actually, you want to leave. We want you to leave via the Rafah crossing into Egypt. But then actually, if you do a bit of investigation, you'll notice that the Rafah crossing has been actually bombed by planes in the last day or two. So they can't get, even though the Egyptian wouldn't allow it, right? Maybe
exactly.
they wouldn't allow it anyway, but just say they bombed it anyway. So they are in a situation now where, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aid them and help them. But it's amazing that you see these videos where they're saying, look, bring it on. Bring it on. Don't think that we're going to go against the resistance. The resistance, what they don't understand is the resistance isn't a group. The entire population is a resistance, bro. Ultimately, because they have all been oppressed. So it's not a group of people that are being oppressed. They've all been oppressed. And that's why when they are now going to be bombarding this land, they can't differentiate between a civilian and a normal person. The place is so densely populated. Half of the percentage of people there are children or babies. So what we're going to see really is a bloodbath, which has been stamped, endorsed by the West. And another style that they tend to use is, this is our Pearl Harbor, this is our 9/11. It's become fashionable now. The US has set this precedent that all you need to turn around and say that this is our 9/11, which basically means no holds barred. You can now do everything, even though it violates their own international law. So, for
Exactly.
example, destroying civilian infrastructure, this is against the Geneva Convention, right? We don't care about this, but listen, it's their law, but they don't care about it too. So ultimately, this is the reality on the ground, bro.
Yeah,
But
subhanallah.
I want to get to, I know time's a bit limited, so I want to get your sort of final thoughts on the whole thing, and however long it takes is fine, bro. What's
Yeah. I guess one of my final thoughts I do want to mention, because I don't want to reiterate myself, is that you mentioned that they go against their own sort of laws. I mean, I met I forgot what that, like those Yahud, those Jews who they they're very supportive of Palestine. They I forgot what it's called.
they're like the Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, they're a minority sect. And I met them, and these people are some people who, like, they're so, like, strict upon following their mitzvot, their laws derived from the Torah, and their sort of religious literature. And the thing is that I remember when I was speaking to one a few years back, because there was a little demonstration in my university, and it was just literally them. They were mentioning how, you know, the Zionists in general, will not even adopt, not even practice the Sabbath, will not even follow so many like mitzvot, the commands of Judaism, but they will somehow entitle themselves with kibr, and Allah Ta'ala defines these people with kibr in a general point, um, that they have this entitlement to this land, even if they don't even rule by their laws. So not only are they violating the secular laws, but they're also violating their own religion, because the thing is that there are multiple evidences within Judaism, within the Torah, that and the Tanakh as well, that they are not allowed to return to these lands until the Messiah, until the Messiah comes for their particular context. So it's so ironic how like selective these secular Machiavellian Zionists are.
Yeah, that's actually a fact, bro, because from their point of view, it's a bid'ah. From their point of
Yeah.
view, until the
It's
Messiah
it's
doesn't
it's
come.
it's haram actually for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
haram. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Actually, even the ones who do live in the occupied lands, even they will say that it's haram for them to go onto the Temple Mount.
yeah.
Yeah. So they might be living in the state. The ones you're on about, they wouldn't even spit on that,
Yeah.
Israel, because they see it as being a innovation. Is and the reality is you do a bit of research. All the Zionist leaders, they were all secular, right?
Yeah.
They're not Netanyahu. He's not religious, okay. So again, like you're saying, the point is this is a European, initially anyway, is European
It is.
colonial project with Europeans. The reality is they are Europeans. They came there and who have a very similar to like the Hindutva, have this nationalist ideology with the blend of a religion in order to get people to motivate and move you with them, right? Ultimately, that is what it is, and they're not religious at all. But at the end of the day, look, the point is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, that the fitrah of these people and their nature, and we see it firsthand. So bro, inshallah, what I'm going to do is bring the podcast to a close. What I will say is jazakallah khair for taking this time out. For our listeners and those watching, this was a plan that we put together in the last day or two, shall I say. It was just something brother Abdul Ahad said, listen bro, we need to speak about this, and I thought I need to get him on the podcast and get his thoughts. Hence why it's, normally these podcasts are a lot longer, but I know brother Abdul Ahad has stuff to do. But yeah, bro, let's keep the ummah in our du'as. Certainly our brothers and sisters in Palestine, in Gaza, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them victory. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them Jannat al-Firdaus, keep them steadfast, and bring destruction on those who are, the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, no matter who they are, no matter where they're from. So on that note, bro, jazakallah khair for joining me, and inshallah ta'ala until the next one, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.